On July 4th of 1947, a rancher named Mac Brazel was inspecting his sheep pasture for any damage caused by a recent storm. He was the owner of Foster Ranch, located just northwest of the sleepy town of Roswell, New Mexico. In his pasture is where he found a debris field of foreign materials from seemingly a crash of some kind. According to military personnel that were witness to the site and even helped in the cleanup, among the wreckage they also found small, inhuman bodies. What is up, YouTube? My name is Trinity, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. It is the 4th of July, but it is also the 79th anniversary since the Roswell incident. If you don't know what the Roswell incident is, it is probably the most famous UFO incident in American history. It kind of set the stage for what UFO and alien culture in the US would be. I was also very surprised to learn that it all started on July 4th, which was a coincidence on my part because I just wanted to talk about aliens. But getting back into the story, Mac Brazel collected some of this material. He said that he found metallic sticks, some sort of tape, some reflecting material, and a strange glossy paper-like material. And a couple days later, on July 7th, he drove into Roswell and he went to the town sheriff, George Wilcox, and showed him what he had found. Now, George Wilcox wasn't especially concerned or even really interested in what Brazel was showing him, but he decided to contact the Roswell Army Airfield located nearby just in case it was from something they had been working on there. He got into contact with Colonel Butch Blanchard, who went to his superior, General Roger Ramey, who gave orders to an intelligence officer named Jesse Marcel to investigate the site and collect whatever materials were there. I assume he gave this duty to an intelligence officer because this was just the beginning of the Cold War, so in their minds they might have been thinking that this was some sort of spy tech from the Soviet Union. Officer Jesse Marcel, along with other soldiers, came to the sheep pasture and they scoured it, collecting any materials they could and loading it up into armored vehicles and taking it back to the airfield. Marcel briefed Blanchard on his findings. Blanchard then gave the order to a public information officer, Lieutenant Walter Haut, to release a statement to the public stating that they believed in their possession they had the wreckage of a flying saucer. After the statement was made public, the Roswell Daily Record made their front page headline, quote, RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. Now, to us, flying saucer is an old school term for what we now call UFOs or even newer UAPs. However, this term was actually coined only a few weeks before the Roswell incident. On June 24th of 1947, a pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported seeing 9 flying objects flying very erratically around Mount Rainier in Washington. He described the way they moved as being like, quote, a saucer if you skip it across the water. Though I suppose that description of how they moved eventually evolved into what we imagine when talking about alien spacecrafts. And at the time, it wasn't always associated with aliens, to my understanding. It was more of a term used to just describe anything unidentified that was flying, but it was later connected to aliens. Now, when this headline went public, General Ramey, he gave the order to have the materials collected from the ranch be brought to him in Fort Worth, Texas for a personal examination. Photos from this examination were released to the public, and among them are pictures of intelligence officer Jesse Marcel also examining the materials again, along with a corrected statement saying that they concluded that the materials were from nothing more than a weather balloon. On July 9th, the headline for the Roswell Daily Record said, quote, harassed rancher who located saucer, sorry he told about it. Brazel would recant any statements he made implying that this was a UFO or anything out of the ordinary, stating that the materials that he had actually found were just some rubber strips, tinfoil, sticks, and some tough paper. And not long after the incident happened, locals said that he had bought himself a new truck and then moved him and his entire family to Alamogordo, New Mexico to start a business. And after that, the case was just kind of dropped. The whole headline debacle was a little strange. However, it seemed to have a very normal explanation. And nobody really thought about the Roswell incident until decades later. Until 1978, when a nuclear physicist slash UFO researcher named Stanton Friedman, who interviewed Jesse Marcel, who said that he never bought the explanation that was given to the public. He said he did not believe what he witnessed that day was a weather balloon. He described some of the foreign material that he had recovered that day. He said, quote, "It felt like you had nothing in your hands. It wasn't any thicker than the foil out of a pack of cigarettes. But the thing about it that got me is that you couldn't even bend it. You couldn't dent it. Even a sledgehammer would bounce off of it. I knew that I had never seen anything like that before." He also stated in the interview that, quote, "It was not anything from this earth, that I'm quite sure of." He explained that given his job at the time, he was familiar with basically all materials used to make aircrafts, and it was nothing even similar to what he had come across before. After this, Friedman went on to interview several more witnesses from the Roswell incident and claimed that there had been a huge cover-up of the entire event. Now, the Air Force slash US government did admit to a cover-up in the 90s, however, we'll get to that later. But there was a lot of shady stuff that went on surrounding this event, like destroyed records from the time with no chain of command to determine who gave the order to destroy these records. Over 600 witnesses were interviewed, many of which were part of the military, not just your average soldiers, but very high ranking in the military. And they gave testimony as to stuff that was seen there or stuff that they had heard from other high ranking officials about what was found. Now, I'm sure there are some discrepancies among the over 600 accounts. However, a lot of the details that are given line up, including the allegation that there were bodies found at the site. Now, during the early days of this investigation, Brazel had apparently called into a local radio station and talked about how he believed that this was an alien aircraft and had even witnessed the alleged bodies himself. However, the radio station received calls from a senator from New Mexico named Dennis Chavez, as well as the FCC, who pressured them not to release it and destroyed any evidence of the interview. Some people interviewed even claimed that Brazel and his family had been detained by the military after this incident occurred. And it seems like it could be related that soon after this alleged detention happened, he bought a new truck and got the hell out of town. It was possible that he was threatened to keep his mouth shut, and that is why he recanted the claims of it being a UFO and witnessing the bodies. Or maybe they paid him off, which could account for the detail of the new truck and suddenly moving away to open a business. Or maybe they threatened him to shut up and he decided on his own to just get his family out of there to avoid the drama. As well as the alleged intimidation of Brazel, some people said they had their homes raided for any crash site materials that the military may have missed in their cleanup. Now, one testimony that strengthens the validity of these claims is the foster daughter of a colonel who was working on this project to keep everyone quiet says that he sat her down and he confessed to her that he was tasked with enforcing an information blackout, as he called it. He and others were given permission to use physical intimidation, physical force, or even the use of weapons if deemed necessary in order to ensure that people did not talk about whatever was found on Foster Ranch. Now, the public information officer that had initially made the statement that the Air Force had found a flying saucer, Lieutenant Walter Hott, left a note that he left instructions to only be opened after his death. This note claimed that the materials that were taken in the office of General Ramey were not materials from the crash site, but actually components of an actual weather balloon, and that they had been swapped out with the actual materials. He also said that Jesse Marcel was very upset by this because they were undermining what he claimed to have seen there. Now, there was also other weird stuff going on surrounding the whole incident. A man named Major General Lawrence Craigie was flown to the site to examine what was there, and according to his pilot, directly after being flown in, the same pilot flew him directly to Washington, D.C. to brief President Truman on what he had found there. Not long after that, he was named the Air Force Chief Director of Research and Development. And while in this position, he would open up Project Sign, which was the first official investigation into UFOs by the US Air Force. Now, getting to the explanations given by the US government in the 90s, they released information on what they called Project Mogul that was happening at the time all across the United States. Now, like I said earlier, this was just the beginning of the Cold War, and they were doing all sorts of wacky stuff in order to try to keep tabs on what the Soviet Union and other countries in Eastern Europe were up to at the time, including nuclear research and development. One project that they were pursuing in order to do this was what Project Mogul was. The theory was that they could put recording equipment onto a balloon and send it up into a portion of the atmosphere called the tropopause, where I assume because of the density of that part of the atmosphere or something, sound traveled really well, similar to how it traveled in the ocean. And theoretically, they would be able to hear nuclear testing and other stuff going on all the way in the Soviet Union from the United States. Now, they were testing this in different locations all around the US at the time, but only a week before the Roswell incident, one of these balloons was sent up in Alamogordo, New Mexico. Now, these devices were made up of a neoprene balloon, radar reflectors, and sonar equipment all attached to a 700-foot string, so I imagine they weren't small balloons. Because it fits the time frame of the event and because it's top secret, your average person might not recognize what they're looking at from a crash site of one of these balloons. And the reason given that even the military didn't really understand what they were looking at is because it was so top secret, your average soldiers wouldn't recognize what they're looking at either. And the excuse of it being a weather balloon was kind of a convenient half-truth at the time. Okay, so that explains the crash itself, but what about the allegations that there were bodies at the scene? In 1997, the Air Force released a 231-page report titled The Roswell Incident Case Closed. They went over again all the details of Project Mogul and how that fit into what had happened in Roswell. But they said that the bodies that were found were in fact test dummies that the Air Force had been dropping for a while around New Mexico in order to test the effects of dropping from different altitudes and the survivability. Now, these test dummies were very humanoid. They had latex skin, aluminum bones, and they were meant to simulate what it would be like for a human to hit the ground. Then military personnel would come out, recover the dummy, and then study the effects of the impact. While Project Mogul makes more sense, in my opinion, this doesn't. In the document, they said that these drops began in the early 1950s, while the Roswell incident happened in 1947. And if these are official documents that are being unsealed for the first time, why would there be a discrepancy of 3 entire years? If they actually started in the very late 1940s, why not say that so it covers the timeline of the Roswell incident? Also, the description of these dummies do not match what people say the bodies at the crash site looked like. These dummies were on average about 6 feet tall, while the bodies described at the crash site were 3.5 to 4 feet tall. Eyewitness testimony said that these bodies weighed about 40 pounds, their skin was light blue or gray in color, and almost reptile-like and completely hairless. Their flesh also had an elastic-like quality around their muscles and bones. They had no outer ear but did have inner ears. Their neck and appendages were extremely thin, with their arms being disproportionately long, almost reaching their knees, and their hands only had 4 fingers, lacking a thumb. Their heads were large and bulbous, as were their eyes, their noses were just holes, and their mouths were lipless slits. So, yeah, the most generic idea that we have of aliens in the modern day. If these were dummies that were being dropped for this experiment that they were doing years before the experiment officially began, why would they make them look so strange? Why would they be so much smaller with obviously non-human features? So now comes my analysis. I'm very conflicted on this one for a couple of different reasons. We did a lot of weird, crazy shit during the Cold War to spy on the Soviet Union and make Americans scared of socialism and communism. So the Project Mogul thing does not sound even crazy enough, in my opinion, for the stuff that we were doing. But the science checks out. I understand it enough that it does make sense, in my opinion. But then, instead of just saying there's no bodies, saying that the bodies were actually dummies, that happened to be deployed at the exact same time as this other top secret project that was happening and happened to land right in the crash site. That was also that's so out of the ordinary and so unlikely. And also, again, the first statement you make about this weird stuff that's found on a random ranch outside of a small town is that it's a flying saucer. That's also strange to me. Like, even if it was a flying saucer, I feel like the military's first idea wouldn't be to be completely public about it. So that also makes me feel weird about it. Maybe it wasn't a UFO, but it was something else top secret that they didn't want people to know about. So they thought, okay, let's say it's aliens and get people all riled up about that, and then they won't actually ask what it is. But then I go back to my own opinions on what aliens are. But I believe aliens are out there. It's almost statistically impossible that they're not out there somewhere, that life is only on Earth. However, my idea of aliens isn't these little humanoid green men, or blue men in this case. When I think of aliens, I don't think they're going to look anything like us. Like, humans are especially unique just for life on Earth. Why would the first aliens we encounter be like versions of us rather than like some weird bacteria or something? Or some sort of almost invertebrate looking creature, because that's what most life on Earth is. It's not especially complex animals like us. If you really want to get into a headache, I've also thought, like, would we even be able to really identify life outside of Earth? Because what if life across the universe doesn't fit into the standards we've given for life here? What if they're not carbon based? What if they don't work the same way? Would we even be able to know if we're looking at an alien if we came across one? But essentially, that is my little analysis. Basically, I don't know what the hell happened, and I don't think anyone really does. And the government destroyed a bunch of records surrounding it, so I don't even know if they could prove that they weren't lying if they wanted to. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you guys so much for all of the love and support on my last video about Obsession. I was a little worried about it because it's a movie with a lot of serious topics, but everyone that commented on it, even if they didn't fully agree with me, were so kind and respectful. And I did my best to at least like and try to respond to all of them, but I couldn't get to everyone because there was just so much traction on that video. But I'm really happy for all the new people that are here. And for the comment that I picked from that video, it's from @KittyG Gaming. Interesting perspective. I like literary analysis, but I haven't gotten super into horror because I didn't really care before my girlfriend. She's super interested in horror, and it's very interesting to see why it exists. You spoke well and explained your points really well. Honestly, super cool, and thanks for sharing this. And first, I just want to thank this person for commenting. I hope you stick around, and maybe you'll even be in the comments of this video. But the reason I picked that one is because it kind of gets at the core of why I chose horror. As a kid and when I was younger, I did not like horror. But then I got into it, and yes, a lot of horror movies are shit, but I feel like horror is a perfect medium to have tough conversations or very interesting conversations. And I feel like a lot of people who may not be interested in it may not understand why those that are find it so thought provoking, because it's not the most accessible genre to get into because a lot of people don't like to be scared, which is totally fine. But seeing that other people are into it, making them curious and wanting to maybe be willing to be a little uncomfortable to experience a conversation that you're not going to find in a rom-com or an action movie is really valuable, in my opinion. I've always said, if you want to get to know a person or a group or a culture or whatever, learn what they're scared of. That'll tell you so much more than knowing what they enjoy. Not that there's no value in knowing what they enjoy, but because fear is such a visceral thing, I feel like it can get really deep into who someone is. There was also another interesting comment that I'll briefly talk about here. I forget who said it. It's a longer comment, but if you go through, I'm sure you'll find it. There's this person who says that they are a system. They have DID, they have other personalities. I'm sorry if that's not quite the correct way to say it, but they were talking about how, in their perspective, losing control in that way that I described Nikki losing control wouldn't quite be as horrifying to them because it's more of a normal thing. Like, one personality taking control is something that they normally go through. So that really got me into the thought process of that would be a really cool horror movie idea. Not something like Split where ooh there's evil personalities that are going to kill you and, it's kind of lazy and boring. But maybe a person that is a system, they have multiple personalities and they do get possessed by something that is not one of these personalities, but because they're so used to kind of switching control, maybe they start realizing, like, hey, I wasn't in control then. This personality wasn't in control then. What the fuck is happening? But that is the video for today. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're subscribed, be sure to hit that notification button so you'll be notified anytime I upload. I appreciate you guys so much. I have so much planned for the future that I am working on, and I can't wait to present to you guys, but I want to wait till it's ready so it's not half-assed or anything. But thank you all so much for watching. I love you so much. Thank you for all of the love and attention you give to my videos. It really warms my heart and inspires me to make more and more. Thank you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.